So we'll come back to you in a second, Jason, because the first item on the agenda, and I want to get it out of the way, is the approval of the April 11th, 2019, that's 18 months ago, minutes. And since Lee and I were the only two there that are here tonight, if you'd like to raise your hand and approve those minutes, Lee, that'll get that out. He raised his hand. Good. Those minutes are approved. Thank you. Then we get on to welcome to Jason Simon, and then now you can continue.
Yeah, thanks. So anyway, as I was saying, I invested this summer in a full house generator. We had lost power enough times that it started to become more than just a nuisance. Particularly, there was a power outage, I think, earlier this summer when COVID was first prevalent. We had a lot of food in the house. It was, expensive, and we just decided to plunge in. I've been frustrated by the power outages. The development I live in, as I was explaining to Bernie, Hidden Oaks. If you walk around our development, there's an extraordinarily large number of homes with generators attached to them. I think it's an unfortunate expense for residents. And I figured if I could get involved and work with you guys and see what I could lend to this committee, it would be a good use of my time. So, that's my sob story. And, I did get interviewed and approved, and glad to be here. Nice to meet all of you.
Good. You may be able to help us from this evening's meeting, Jason, because I'm kind of disappointed that Dan Grenier isn't here. And the first item on the agenda. Oh, yes. Yes. Dan, you're here.
I am.
I was about to say we were missing you. Good.
You can't get rid of me that easily.
You are our link to the Board of Supervisors.
Yes. One of the things that I've been doing, since the board hasn't been, with this weird meetings this year, obviously because of COVID and everything else, we haven't been able to get together. And I know this group historically, before I came on board, met. I don't think we've talked about this before. He didn't have the strongest or greatest connection to the board itself, to the supervisors. The former liaisons didn't show up, let's say, and your meetings were few and far between.
When we had Kristen Tyler as our liaison, things ran very well.
Yeah.
And when we had Jeff Benedetto, I don't think we ever saw him, did we, Bernie?
No.
Yeah.
So
we're trying to fix that, but in the interim, what related to this group, there's two things. Just I'll give you a little feedback from the board and a few things that I've been doing personally. Whenever there's a power outage, whether it's township wide or there's a small group where we're seeing trends. I can give you an example. Just up the street from where I live, there's a pocket of 10, 15 homes or so that are on a minor circuit that just always had lots and lots of trouble. So I would independently reach out to PICO and get their outage histories and say, hey, what's going on? And can you give me an update as to the next set of projects that are going to occur and when they're going to happen and how they're going to happen? How's it going to fix this issue? And the one example up the street, they were putting in some new wire that's storm-proof per se, just shield wire, and it really came down to it was backyard electric, backyard wires, and the standard deal people weren't maintaining the trees, and PICO wasn't coming out to do the same. So that I've personally been trying to maintain a closer connection. The board doesn't call PICO in when we have power outages. The manager is able to typically, and our state reps are typically invited to for big outages across the county. They're invited to the calls, and we'll get feedback. But I'm trying to elevate that a little bit and get a little more directly involved and make sure we have closer reaction. So like in Mr. Simon's case, one of his neighbors, or not direct neighbors, but in his neighborhood, had also reached out to me about Hidden Oaks. So I did the same thing, and just got the outage history since about 2012 to see what the heck's going on, and then see what the projects have been over the years, and most recently, 2020 for that particular neighborhood. I think there's been 3 what PICO would consider major outages, or what, more importantly, what PUC would consider major outages, 3 in 2020 and a couple in 2018, which before that, there really weren't that many at all. So it's like, there's a trend. So what's going on with this trend? And it turned out that there was some bad equipment that they had to replace, and some more vegetation issues that they hopefully fixed. But it's just, I don't think we get that sort of feedback from them unless we're vigilant about it, about asking the questions. And so I'm trying to push, especially with PICO, with this group, but I think just asking more questions so we get more communication and more feedback. And I think, Jason, that's your wheelhouse is communications and asking the right question. So we have some folks with some really great technical backgrounds and a lot of history on that side of things, and have some relationships with PICO. But kicking it up a notch, I think, in terms of communications is key. Before we get into the meat of this too, the other thing, and we talked about this last year, and John, you and I talked about this separately recently. The board the supervisors are looking at what generally all of our advisory boards and commissions and their charters and how many we have, and what's the best use of those groups and the best use of everyone's time, and how can we make it more efficient and get people as involved as possible, so you're not just on an advisory board in name only, you're on an advisory board that actually advises, and we take advantage of the knowledge that we have in this township as much as possible. So one of the things we're looking at doing with this board specifically is possibly one, kind of expanding the charter a little bit. And this is still early, but we've already talked about this, expanding the charter to include more utilities is sort of, we don't have really many public utilities in this town. We seem to outsource everything. So we have, between PICO and the water company, and now we're going to have private sewer soon. And we have a lot of private utility or utility-like services, whether or not they technically qualify as utility, is to possibly alter the charter of this group a little bit to include those other utilities, so that we can have more feedback, more communication, and more tracking of issues. Like when we had with PA Water, when we had the infamous turbidity incident, but what was that, a year and a half ago or so? It seems like it was forever ago now, but just kind of, there are other issues like that happen that aren't that big of a deal, but they are issues when folks are, they're having flush outs or something, they're flushing the lines or something, people aren't aware, just to track that type of thing and other issues that people might have. So I don't know how that'll play itself out, or if it even will, but it's something, when we think about it that way, this group could be a central location for information and communication back to the, tracking issues to get back to the board, so we can have a central location to get all that and get it back to the board and manager, so we can see what the trends are and then address them. So anyway, that's my soapbox, but I figured I'd give you all that ahead of time.
Just following on from that, Dan, the next item on the agenda is the letter that we wrote to the Board of Supervisors last June, not
Yep.
this, sorry, June of last year.
June of 19. Yeah.
And essentially what we've been trying to do as a group over the last 4 or 5 years, whatever it is to get a better relationship with PICO. And we were headed that way, but it seems that with whatever changed at the township, our contact at PICO, Ted Durand, said he wouldn't talk to us. He would only talk through the township manager. So that didn't do us any good. And we certainly didn't get any acknowledgement or response from the Board of Supervisors to the letter we wrote last year, which was essentially to say that we need to have more reliability data specific to Lower Makefield Township, not address by address, but a regular update from PICO about what's happening, what's being done, what are they doing to address, weaknesses in the system. And we haven't had any response at all from the BOS.
So here's, let's see, was it last meeting or in the meeting? Since our last conversation, John, I can't remember if it was about a month ago, I'll say, right?
Yeah.
Plus or minus.
Yeah.
I did not get a copy of that letter until you emailed it to me. I know you had sent it directly to our township manager, and Perry Warren responded, and our township manager did not provide it to the board. So what I did, I brought it up with him that, I reminded him of the letter. I don't know that he had any recollection of it. So I thank you for emailing it to me about that time. I brought it up to him during one of our meetings. I can't remember if it was in conversation, during executive session or in a public meeting. I honestly can't remember. But I ended up circulating it to the board a couple of weeks back, about the same time as not yesterday's meeting, but the meeting before that. So it was probably 3 or 4 weeks ago now. And I haven't heard a response yet. But one of the things I think could come out of this meeting is, one, a reminder of that letter, but I can also, depending on what you all want to do, obviously, I would like to go over that letter or remind people about that letter, emphasize that letter, whatever word you want to use during the supervisor report at our next meeting on, 2 weeks from yesterday, whatever the date, the 24th.
Can I just step back a little bit, Daniel, and just help me out? You said you contacted PICO and they gave you some information about electrical failures or whatever because you just asked them for it.
Yeah.
How did you do that? Because
Sure.
The thing is that we haven't been able to do that because we've been going through this Ted Durant. And so how did you do that? Because the thing is that would be really, really useful for us because we really do want to know what not the hotspots are, what the not hotspots are.
So that's a great question, Bernie, and I should have explained that earlier. So what I did is I don't go into when I ask PICO for information, and I did go through Ted Durant. He was responsive and he gave me the information. But what I do, and maybe it's, I'm a supervisor, so that carries some weight when I ask a question. But honestly, any PICO customer can ask for their own outage history over whatever period of record, right? So when I do it, it's usually because some resident who has an address has had an issue over time. And if there's several residents in a row, it's logical that they're on the same circuit. I might just give 2 addresses, say, hey, can you give me the history? What's going on here? What's their outage history and the reasoning for this? And what do you have planned? So for example, when I mentioned just up the street from me, I got addresses from two people and just said, hey, do you want me to use your address and get your outage history? And they said, sure. And I just sent an email into Pico and said, hey, can I get the outage history for these few addresses and see what's going on? And then what project do you have scheduled there, and what's the plan moving forward? Similarly for Hidden Oaks. Sorry, Jason, I almost forgot the name of your neighborhood. I know a few different people that live there, and I said, hey, do you mind if I just use your address? And they're not all in one line per se, but they're in different parts of the neighborhood. So I just use that as a way to see if there were trends in different. They all had the same information, so clearly the whole neighborhood was on the same circuit, same issue. So that's how I've done it. I've never gone to Pico. You know, we've talked about going to Pico and getting overall township, larger scale information for township level or parts of the township. I haven't done that. I'm usually pretty specific about the addresses where I'm looking.
That's good to know, because the thing is that it just nibbles at the problem. But the thing is that it can build a case a little bit more. So it's good to know that. And who specifically do you email at Pico?
Oh, it's typically Ted Duran. He's I can't speak ill of Ted. He has his methods, and if I ask him politely for the information, and he provides it. There's nothing snarky about it or no ill will. He just says, here you go, and that's what we're working on. And it's very straight to the point, professional, and he provides it in a timely manner. So
I don't think we ever thought he was snarky, but the thing is that he just kind of changed directions quickly and decided that he would only contact the township manager. And I've no idea why, but the thing is that we've had a good relationship with him, although he stonewalls quite often, and we. As engineers, we would prefer to talk to his engineers, but he won't let us.
Yeah, I've just put up on the screen his response, Ted Duran's response to your request 18 months ago for outages affecting your area, Highland Drive, Lower Hilltop. And quite frankly, it didn't really say much. And there was doubt about the veracity of it. Was it just...
So I can give you a follow-up on this one. So the Lower Hilltop section is the one that in this part of the town has the most issues, because they're on they had the one section of the circuit that hadn't truly been improved or hardened, as they say in the industry. And they just they just completed that work, I believe, in June of this year. Mm-hmm. So, and it was when you dug into it, what we found out was that they needed to replace some poles, and they were Verizon poles that Pico couldn't. Their agreements to me are kind of silly, but the way they work, I believe they were Verizon poles that needed to be replaced. They put up new wire on those poles once they were replaced, and they did some more tree trimming and removal, etc. But that's how they were supposed. I believe, I can't remember if it was this email. They were supposed to have completed this work back in maybe November of 19, if memory serves. I haven't looked at this one in a while, and it dragged out, as things do in that industry sometimes. 6-7 months with I don't think they had any stoppages in their work for COVID, but obviously things slow down a little bit for how they complete things. But I know in this case, they did finally complete the work, and I haven't heard from the folks that have the most issues in that little part of town recently. And I know that if they have issues, I will absolutely hear from them, because they know I'll go get information. I'll go find out what's going on.
One thing we've determined in this committee is that people are always interested when the lights go off, but as soon as they come back on, no one wants to say anything.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Except for me.
except for Jason. Yeah.
That's why he's here.
Hey, Dan, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I appreciate all the heavy lifting you're doing. But I'm completely coming at this new, but it's a lot on one person's plate, even as the liaison to the committee. Is there a more efficient way to be able to gather this information? Because, the committee certainly wants to be able to sort of assess the data. And, I think it gets back to John's earlier point about Ted sort of being directed, or at least seemingly only wanting to work through Kirk or Kurt or yourself. So what's a better, or maybe it's not better, but is there a more efficient way to be able to gather this information? Because it feels like there's a middleman, and I love it, but I'm wondering if there isn't a better way to do this.
That was a very polite way of saying, come on, man. And I agree with you. The point of the letter, is that the letter you brought up on the screen, I think?
So the letter's on the screen there.
Yeah. So the whole point of that letter, and I fully back this letter if we can accomplish this goal, is to really do just that. And there's a combination of information gathering so we can assess the information and be more knowledgeable of the overall system reliability in the township. And then obviously based on what we find out, address those, come start study it and see what we may need to do to address those issues. Obviously the board needs to understand this letter and as the whole board wrap our heads around what it would mean to do this and how we might go about doing that. And I absolutely feel that we should attempt to get more information for township wide, and then have this committee analyze the data and see what comes of it. Where we run into an issue, I think, is that some of the data, not all of it, but some of the data is protected information. And I don't mean necessarily that there's this a term in the utility world called CEII, critical energy and infrastructure, where basically Homeland Security, post 9/11, utility infrastructure information is very, very tightly guarded. Yeah. At the same time, we can still learn about failures and successes and failures of that same infrastructure, whether we don't have to know where all the equipment is per se, right? And the location of all the circuits. So it's finding a reasonable, happy medium that still allows us to understand what's going on in the township and where improvement is needed, so that we can have those discussions with the utility, in this case, PECO.
If we can just jump down to item 4C2 on the agenda, that's request of PECO presentation to LMT. Now, we did have a number of presentations from PECO just to, the township itself, not to the public, because any meetings from PECO to the public tended to end as a bun fight. People were just shouting. And I would very much like to get another presentation from PECO to the township, which would include, this committee and whoever else the Board of Supervisors wishes to invite.
Yeah, I think that's I'll say it in a positive way instead of I think that's a good idea. I think actually this format, the electronic remote format might actually be more comfortable for PECO, because then it's easier to do presentations. And, PECO's always, for whatever reason, all these utilities are always concerned about getting hammered by the public for whatever reason. And to some extent, that's okay. If there's an issue, they should hear about it. But at the same time, if we want to if we want to hear the information and be able to understand it, we have to be able to let them speak and provide it.
Yeah,
So,
in the past we've had they've included one or two of their engineers, and once you get them talking, they do loosen up a bit without offering anything to drink, and they tell us things that maybe would turn Ted Duran white, but I know he gets very, very worried and goes very pale in the face when he thinks they're getting close to giving away secure information. But nonetheless, if we keep it general, you know, we're cutting trees here, we're cutting trees there. We've had underground cables blow up here. We've had a number of underground cables blow up in our area at Yardley Hunt, and that takes a long time to fix. But is it always vegetation? Is it something that the township can do, and so on and so on and so on?
Yeah. Well, so John, I don't mean to. One idea I'm thinking out loud. I want to see what the group thinks. If PICO is hesitant to present directly to this group or to the board, one of the things we've done over the last couple of years with PennDOT as an example, where we had some PennDOT concerns, is we teamed up with Representative Warren's office and had meetings with PennDOT and went over some issues that were both in the borough and the township. And we had a nice group meeting to go over some of those issues. And, you know, that setting actually worked very well. That wasn't during COVID, so we were all in one big room, but I could see us, if a presentation to, formal presentation to the Board of Supervisors was not something that was palatable to them for whatever reason, it might be a nice overall community presentation too, between the borough, Lower Makefield, and Representative Warren's office. They tend to respond to him pretty well too. So that's just another idea, another approach.
That's what we did. I approached Perry Warren, and he was very, and that was one of the reasons why we sent a letter to him. Mm-hmm. But he was very responsive to this, and he was interested in it. So I think Perry Warren would be very, very appreciative of in this to keep in this loop.
Yeah, and not for nothing, I'd be remiss to not mention Senator Sanachero, who, obviously he's been from my information, has been working on this type of issue for a while, so he may also be interested. But general comment is, if sometimes it's a little less formal and a little looser, and to your point, John, about learning more information in that setting, that may be a better approach with Perry and or Steve, and maybe involving the borough, since we're all, as we say sometimes, we're different towns, but we're one big community with the township. That might be another approach that could work well.
Yeah, I neglected to mention Steve because last week he did have that Senate hearing. Was it last week or was it this Tuesday? Last week, and he has worked hard over the years to get PICO to do things. And sure, the PICO representative on at the Senate hearing, I think you logged into it, didn't you, Bernie?
I did.
Yeah, the PICO representative, she was very complimentary about Steve, and he was very complimentary about the openness of PICO. Well, we'd like to get some openness too,
Yeah.
So,
but just wanted to kind of dovetail into that the PUC meeting or reliability report. Steve, I agree, was very interested in the thing, and two things that really came out to me so far as Steve was concerned, and he was talking about what is the new reasonability, what is more reasonable now, because the thing is that the storms are increasing. What happens now when the reality is that the storms are going to be increasing? What are PICO going to do? about that, and that's really an important thing, because they were talking about the issue that we can be perfect and not lose any electricity, but our bills are going to go rocketing. But so what is the reasonableness of it? And I thought Steve made a good point on that one. And also, he did indicate, and this might be a strategy that I've been thinking about, and John, you mentioned it because you're related to the fire people. There's usual suspects, places that keep on dropping power. What are you going to do with those people? And maybe we should just concentrate on that and then go fan out after that. You're talking about Hidden Oaks, and we've got one just down the road here, Sandy Run. Always, there's a tree always falls over every time there's a storm. So anyway, the thing is that I just dovetailing into that that report and Steve Santaciro's message to us. So I just wonder whether we need to formulate a strategy.
Well, let me just say something. There seems to be a reluctance on our part to approach the PUC. Is there a reason for that?
Well, the PUC is at a very high level, Lee. I think that's been what we found in the past. They lay down the standards, and they try to keep the utilities meeting those standards. And the report that I attached to the agenda has got some what I call "Who's a Naughty Boy" charts, and PECO is very much a "Who's a Naughty Boy" on their reliability charts at the end. But at the same time, what is PECO doing about it? And of course, PECO's got a very big area. What's it? 30,000 miles of transmission lines, distribution lines, and so on and so on. But what are they doing for Lower Makefield? And I don't know that the PUC will be able to help us much there, Lee. I'm just going to relate a situation I had right across the street from Shady Brook Farms. There's a distribution line, and it was sagging tremendously, not during high loads or anything like that. Normally, it was almost sagging into the trees. I called PECO 2 or 3 times. They didn't do anything. So I said, you know what? Time to call the PUC. And when I called the PUC, all of a sudden, those lines got taken care of. Now, I think maybe like Dan was saying, if we approached PECO and said we'd like the CEII and all that other stuff, they're not going to tell you where substations are. They're not going to tell you where this, that, and the other thing is. But I don't see why if we presented PECO with and I don't want to use the word request, something so hard, see if we could get information on what's going on in Lower Makefield. And if PECO doesn't provide it, then let's just go up to the PUC. That's what they're there for. I respect Representative Warren. I'd rather not. I don't want politics to get involved with it. But when you talk about hardening a system, it's for one thing, Yardley's grown in population. I don't know what the statistics are. So the number of outages and people affected by a single outage is going to grow. I'm not justifying PECO. That's got to be considered. But when you take a look, like especially vegetation, does PECO own the right of way? Are there any is there any rear property like power lines going through somebody's backyard that PECO has unlimited access to? There are all kinds of legal questions that have to be addressed. And then, of course, it all boils down to dollars. So, there's a lot of lines at the back of properties, particularly down by the river, even around where Jason Simon lives. There's a lot of trees coming down on the lines there. I know the last storm, I think the fire company had about 33 calls for trees on wires, not that the fire company can do anything, but for some reason the people, homeowners call the fire company first and PICO last. Let's face it, vegetation is growing too.
To piggyback on Lee a little bit, and I guess for some of these early meetings, I'll be asking questions in the form of comments. Dan knows me to understand that, but we are their customers, and we are ultimately, as residents, paying them. And I understand the structure of the PUC and all the sort of levels of bureaucracy that go into this, but I think sort of where Lee is going with this is, is there a way that the residents themselves can, and we can help coordinate the residents in being able to make those complaints to the PUC and create some pressure points for PICO by almost acting as a conduit, and when I say conduit, Dan, just specifically to the BOS, I mean providing residents with information on how to deal with an outage reporting, educate people on, all kidding aside, John, not to call the police or the fire department, but to call PICO, but also, maybe creating a simple way for people through the lmt.org website to submit a complaint to the PUC when they have an outage. Because I think PICO solves the problem in whatever period of time, and everything gets resolved. Nobody gets a credit on their bills. Nobody gets any sort of additional, result, and life goes on. So, and then the problem happens again. So I'm wondering if there isn't a way to utilize our committee to be more responsive, or at least give residents an idea that the township is providing a resource or opportunity to get their voices heard. Because I wouldn't know as a layman what to do.
So I can answer that a little bit, Jason, but I can answer what the formal process is, but I don't know that the township's ever kind of consolidated that and had one big push of residents. So there is, and I have it up on my screen on my end here, on my other computer. There is a process for filing complaints with the PUC for individuals.
Right.
And there's an informal process where you file it, and the PUC tries to work it out with whatever utility you're filing it against. And then there's a formal process which may involve litigation. But it's easy. It's pretty easy. I know a few folks that have done it before before I was on the board, actually, there were a few folks who they had a hell of a time with a few of their issues. And I just said, hey, here's if you're not getting any response from anyone, whether it's at the township or PICO or any utility you're dealing with, here's the website. Just fill out the form. And they did it. And it was one of these underground, from my recollection, it was one of these underground lines. PUC responded, and, there was paper trail. And I'm not aware that the township historically, if we've had, consolidated a bunch of issues and complaints and communicated all of those at once to the PUC, because as you know, I mean, it's common sense. If you get if the PUC, if we had a situation where PICO was failing miserably, and suddenly we have 10,000 residents all complaining at once, whether it's through the township or individually, just all at once, that obviously that'll get a response, right?
Well, yeah, and I've been around long enough and close enough to our LMT government for a while. I don't remember an effort, and particularly with social media, the LMT, the township Facebook page. There's easy ways for us to provide those links and get that information out, because I kind of feel like he or she who screams the loudest at the PUC or PICO gets the worm.
You're right. You're right.
And we're in a position with this committee, and the Board of Supervisors is in a position with this committee this committee doesn't only have to be doing data gathering and information sharing, but it can also act as a conduit. And as you pointed out, I have a lot of experience with the sports programs here, and the Parks and Rec Board does a lot of shielding and a lot of public engagement and deals a lot with the user groups before the BOS has to get involved and get recommendations, from that particular board. So just as an idea, piggybacking on Lee, I think if we can create a commonality with voices when there's a problem and help people know how to make those notices, because the other thing we all know is PECO has their app. Their timing is never accurate on when, you can expect the power to come back on. There's a lot of traffic around that, and I think it would be a really good position for the township to be in, to be able to provide resources for people. And that's really all I'm talking about. I'm not suggesting litigation. I'm not suggesting, a formal bundling, but if even we provide an easy way for them to file those complaints, it may create some of the attention that we're seeking.
Yeah, and not only that, I think that we should be providing resources to learn too, not just to complain per se, but to
I agree.
Learn more about the utility, how to get your own information. If you have an outage at PECO, this is how you get. Most people might have the app or know how to get to PECO, but not everyone does, and then they get nervous. Right. So this is how you contact PECO or whoever. This is how you file and log your outage. This is how you check it. And if worse comes to worse, this is how you file a complaint. And if they don't resolve it, this is the next step that we would take. So I could get behind that.
John, Lee, and Bernie are like the new guy is going to create work for us. So
yeah. Well, no, it's a good idea, and I think we should. We got to do something to get through, and that may be the way to do it.
Because I think if the short
the PUC at the same time. Yep.
Yeah, and I think short of I think they're a complaint-based business. And I've been reading through a lot of the documentation everyone has shared, and clearly the way they measure themselves, and my skepticism is some of those outages, Dan, that you shared with me about Hidden Nooks felt a lot longer to those of us that were living them than what they reported to you. And, particularly when people are going through that. But I think that the collective voices that we could harness could be helpful, and it also could be helpful in educating, Dan, to your point as well, the vegetation challenge, people who may have lines running through their properties, being able to sort of understand the impact that, overgrown trees or vegetation could have on the lines, almost around the idea of like, we all have to help, because like Hidden Oaks, we're buried underground, but our feeder systems are not.
Right.
So, we're dependent on our neighbors or PECO to protect us a little bit. So that's it. I just, I'll be quiet, but thought that might be an idea to think about.
I think it's a reasonable approach, but earlier on during this committee, I think Kristen tried to be proactive, and nobody really cared unless the power went, and then they became reactive. So the thing is that over the years, she sent a letter to everybody trying to log in all of the power failures so that we have that information, and nobody responded. So it needs to be, unfortunately, it needs to be calibrated to reactive rather than proactive, I think.
Yeah. PECO.
I think it has to be electronic. Sorry.
So I was going to say with the smart meter program now, PECO knows when the power is off. In theory.
But they always ask, and that's what we have on the website, that you should call just to make sure that they are listening to the smart meters for some reason.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I don't know how much trust I put in the smart meters, but one thing I just want to say before I forget is if we're going to talk to residents about making sure vegetation doesn't get into the power lines, I'm not sure we should be doing that, because if they're screwing around with a tree and it falls into a line, the consequences aren't going to be so pretty. And this is from a legal perspective. I would hate for them to be able to point to us and say, you guys told me to keep the lines clear of vegetation. So again, this is a very tough legal area we're going into.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that's accurate, and it's a good point. So maybe it's about identification, not remediation, right? So being able to share that information for people that may have lines in on their properties that aren't easily seen. But I agree with you, Lee. I don't want to have people touching anything around them. But again, a way for them to be able to report potential overgrowth so that, that information can get to PICO and be proactive in that regard. That would be just an alternative to that concept.
Yeah, and I just want to, one thing, I've moved down here from Long Island almost 4 years now, but I remember one of those hurricanes, I think it was Irma, that hit Long Island. Long Island had a lot of overhead, a lot of trees and stuff like that. And after that hurricane hit, the utility made a concerted effort to get onto those right-of-ways and clear the vegetation. I don't know the legalities of it, because they did not own the property under the lines, but they were able to get into it. But, it cost them a pretty penny. But, that's just something that if PICO is pushed, it's something they should do.
Yeah. And Leah, just after that's probably one of the biggest things that we could do in our area, just because of the number of trees we have. But to your point, a couple of years back, maybe 3 years ago now, PICO did, to their credit, I'll give them credit for this one. They had a massive tree program come from Upper Makefield, maybe even further north than that, and then go right down Taylorsville, down Main Street, however far down Route 13 they went, and they cleared a ton of trees. In my neighborhood, actually, they upgraded to 34 kV with 10-foot. The poles went up 10 feet and the voltage went up, and they cleared a bunch of trees around here too. But then they went into a bunch of neighborhoods off of Taylorsville and did just that. And reliability has been much better since then. Yeah. But there's still more to do, right?
Oh, yeah. And then another thing too, I mentioned to you about the sagging wires I reported. Well, those wires weren't insulated. I mean, what kind of utility practice is that? Like the Long Island Lighting Company had all uninsulated wires. Then after the hurricanes, they made an effort and they put all that 13 kV stuff, they made it all insulated wire, and they cut down on the outages tremendously.
Yeah, storm hardened wire and what they call Hendrix lines. That's the bundled conductors. They got a bunch of that down Black Rock. If you go down Black Rock, you'll see Hendrix lines. They're 3 conductors spaced apart and supposed to be able to take the weight of a tree on them. And I haven't heard much from people on Black Rock. Bernie and I did get involved with some residents off of Manor Road several years ago, where PICO did come in and cut down a tree, even though they'd said they originally PICO said they wouldn't touch the tree. But after we called Ted Durand, Ted pulled whatever strings he could get, he could pull, and they did come in and take the tree down. But anyway, yeah, going back, 2013, 2014, I think that's when Steve Santasiero and Chuck McElhenney, Senator McElhenney, they both worked together on getting PICO's attention. PICO identified pocket outages in this area, and they did do a lot of work, and including cutting the trees back. Of course, that invited a lot of complaints from people who said that PICO was spoiling the environment, but whatever. And it did work. Reliability, we think reliability improved. Is it getting worse now because the trees have grown back or what? I don't know. But certainly trying to get their attention, as you suggest, Simon, then Jason, So I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, sorry. Certainly, as you suggest, Jason, good idea. Let's see if we can make it happen. How are we going to do it? Is it all down to Dan to find out how we do it at the township, or is it?
No, I think. How about this? Sorry, Jay. I'll just say it this way. You're an advisory board, right? I would say, like any other advisory board, come up with an idea that you think would work, and I'll be here to liaise to give some feedback from the board perspective. But come up with some ideas that you would like to see implemented that could work. Maybe a couple different variations on those ideas, depending, and we'll see what we can do. At the same time,
Dan, can I ask a question on process though for that?
Sure.
I recall from some of the other committee work I've done over time that, sometimes a board like this or an advisory committee like this would actually come up with like a formal proposal and, send it to the full board for consideration. Obviously working with you as the liaison.
Yeah.
That may include John as our chair or whomever presenting to the Board of Supervisors as well. Maybe we won't resolve it tonight, but can we talk as we develop some of this around what the best process would be to get the outcome we're all seeking with your peers?
Absolutely. Yes. 100%. We have to do that. That's sort of embedded in everything that we end up doing with this committee, right. I think.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I absolutely. Cause the board has different, we're five individuals. We agree on a lot of stuff. We don't agree on other stuff. We also have our township professionals that are staff that have their own opinions and will offer their own guidance on these things, which we need to take into consideration. And there may be, we raised one legal issue. There may be others that the solicitor has to chime in on for things that we do. But in terms of coming up with a couple of concepts for processes and procedures, that's not a one and done deal. I think that's an iterative process that gets reviewed and tweaked, and maybe it take a little time, maybe a little frustrating here and there. But at parallel path, though, I do think we should also look to develop, I don't know if that's the right word, but come up with a meeting request and agenda that would include Perry and maybe Steve and the township and the borough, not necessarily a PICO presentation because you don't want to put them on the spot per se, but really just a conversation with them in that group at the same where we're talking about things, and then let them know, hey, we have this committee that's going to be organized to collect information from our end that we're going to keep track of things, and we'd like PICO to be an active participant in information sharing. Make it into a feedback loop. That companies. I'm sure you're aware. You've had this experience. Companies are often afraid of that initially, but those often make for the best, most productive relationships.
Well, obviously, the letter we wrote last year, somewhat along these lines, was a bit too nice. We now need a sledgehammer approach to get through, right? I don't want it going. Anything we do could end up in the dead letter file, as I think this letter did. How do we make it happen?
Well, okay. So what I would do before writing I don't want to say scrap this letter, but for all intents and purposes, let's piggyback this letter with. Here's my thought. Take a couple meetings to develop some ideas, make them into, I would say, we come up with some ideas and develop them over the course of a few meetings, right? And we have, since we are a group, you are a group that is, official township group, you have to be careful of Sunshine Act, stuff like that. I'll say that up front. But I would suggest taking a few meetings. Maybe instead of meeting once a quarter for a while, maybe meet every month and start to more fully develop that process, maybe assign, maybe assign a couple of subtasks to different members to come up with some information to bring back to the group. And that, just like any other process you're looking to develop that's new, right? And bring that back, and over the course of a couple of meetings, come up with a plan to present to the, and then summarize it for me to bring back to the board. And when you're comfortable with the plan, whatever it may be, send an email with request to the process is to send it to the township manager, but copy me as your liaison this time. And then I will push for the rest of the board to talk about it, whether it's in, we have this thing during board meetings that I set up last year called discussion items. It's not for a vote per se, but it's to discuss things. This is tailor-made for the discussion items portion of a board of supervisors meeting. So this is something that could be put in on the agenda as a discussion item for the board. You all can, hopefully some point soon, we'll be back in person so we can have a discussion in the old fashioned way, but you all would be invited to present to the board the idea, and I could help facilitate that a little bit if I had to, but you all would be invited to present your idea. The board would consider it, probably ask some questions, maybe give you some homework based on that discussion. You could give us some homework, and then we come up that eventually, and hopefully in short order, that turns into a solid plan that we all agree upon, and then we vote. We vote to implement it. That's
Jason appears to have the tools at his fingertips to be able to make things happen. Maybe you could put a few thoughts down on paper, Jason.
Sure.
Is that hazing, John? I see that smile.
No, well, we gotta do something, Dan, because obviously the approach last year didn't work, and we got to find a way out of it.
We just.
I don't know what relationship Kurt has with Ted Duran, but the email from Ted that said in future please communicate through the township manager wasn't very encouraging.
Well, I wouldn't take that too strongly. I'm not sure how else. That's not quite how I want to say that, but I would not be too discouraged by that. Ted has been very responsive to me specifically because I'm the one that reaches out to him, and he's always responded. I spoke to him last year about potentially coming to give some type of presentation, and kind of like I had asked PA Water to come and give a presentation as well, and they did. This was after their turbidity issue, and that went well. That was reasonable. They had a few difficult questions, but they were able to explain what happened and how they were going to improve it and how to move on. And they should do that. So I think if we have an organized plan that makes sense, that's respectful of PICO, but also gets our point across, there's no reason not to do it. I think it would be a win-win if we can do that the right way. And Jason, I mean this in a very loving way. He's got a big mouth and he's not afraid to use fingertips. I mean, so we take advantage of that, and I'll do my part on the board. And then when it's time to present, we present it in a very thoughtful, professional way. And that's, it's up to the board to support it.
Well, Dad, what's the future of this group? You had mentioned earlier that you were thinking of combining it with other utility groups or something.
Well, that's not set in stone, but one of and Lee, I'm not sure if you heard me saying it earlier today or if that was a previous meeting. But we have, because this group I know there was some feeling about, this group really wants to do, we have a good group of folks here that we don't want to waste your time and waste your knowledge. We want to take advantage of the fact that you're part of one of our advisory boards and you have a wealth of knowledge and a great skill set. So one of the things the board's been talking about, and I'm personally in favor of, is to not combine with another board, but expand your charter a little bit, because we have a lot of private, basically all of our utilities are now private or will be shortly. So, and all of them are regulated by the PUC. So we will no longer have a direct connection to any of our utilities in the township, right? Good, bad, or otherwise. That's just, they're all private companies, and we have private companies running all of our utilities now. And like anything else, whether they're great utilities or they're terrible ones, eventually something breaks, or something doesn't go right, and we're going to have to be able to communicate, give them feedback and track that type of stuff. So my thought is, this group's had been meeting once a quarter up until this year, and looking to be more involved. And I think we can do that specifically with PICO based on what we're talking about tonight. But I think those same processes and procedures and needs are also there and will be there with other utilities. And if this group is already doing that with the electric utility, I think we could piggyback that with the other utilities. So I don't know what you all think of that, but that's just something I've been thinking about for a while.
Well, water and sewage has never been high on my priority list. Water, perhaps, but certainly not the sewage. My interest is very much in electrical reliability. I don't know what influence we could or would have over the other companies, the water company or the sewer, whoever's taken over the sewer company. What do they call themselves?
Aqua is their name. Essential Utilities is the parent company. Aqua is the sewer company their subsidiary.
I don't know what others feel, but I'm primarily interested in electric reliability, and it has become very frustrating not being able to do anything. And if Jason can come up with ways and means for collecting information via the township, that'd be great. I think I'm just trying to remember the name of the person on the Senate hearing with PICO. I'd like to get it to her.
If you can find that name, I'll be happy to track her down.
Yeah, it's in the report attached to the agenda.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yeah. I made notes on the Senate hearing. I don't know if you did, Bernie, but I tried to keep track of the people who were talking, and particularly I know her last name was Levine. I've forgotten her first name, but anyway. If we can contact her directly through either through Steve Santasiero or directly, then that might make things happen. I could let her know nicely that we listened to the Senate hearing and we're very interested and happy that PICO is doing a great job, but we want a bit better than great in Lower Makefield. So. But certainly a presentation from PICO to the township. I'm not talking about, public meeting, talking about letting us know what's happening in the way of equipment upgrades and so on. Around your area, Dan, with the upgrade to 34 kV, they now have a ring main system.
Ring bus,
with the auto reclosers.
Yeah.
One disadvantage of those is that there'll be minor power outages. The power may go off just long enough for people's clocks to get upset. Yeah. And then people are complaining they've got to reset their clocks. But anyway.
Well, and I think that's part of what's been going on in Jason's neighborhood is they have a whole bunch of 10-minute outages that because of that system, so which is
right
a pain in the backside because they feel like forever, and there's probably more of them.
And we shouldn't have to install generators. Steve made that point at the beginning of the Senate hearing that he's putting in or has put in a whole house generator for his home, and he lives fairly close to Hidden Oaks, doesn't he? I'm not sure which feeder he comes off of.
Who's that?
Steve Santasiero, Senator Santasiero.
Four houses from where I am right now.
There you go.
That's right.
So he's putting in a generator, right?
Yep. And there's 5 of us that just did it right around my house.
So, John, you said that you were thinking about it, and it'd be April of next year before they come to your house.
Yeah. All the contractors I've contacted, they're loaded. They're all fully booked for well into the new year. And the older I get, that seems a little bit too far ahead. So
give us a break.
Yeah, but anyway, we shouldn't have to put in generators. I've got a small generator which allows us to get by, but it's a portable generator, not for the faint-hearted. But anyway, just looking at the agenda again, the PUC report, I don't intend to go through that in detail. There's 111 pages. I did pull out the pages relevant to PICO, and they're attached to the agenda I sent out. And the Senate hearing, there was a report mentioned there, but reading through that, the CCIF report was really about resilience of the electrical transmission system, really. We're more interested in distribution. And then we've already talked about a PICO presentation to LMT. I still think that should be part of it, and I'd like to encourage that. Dan, if you can make that happen, that'd be great. If we need to get Steve or Perry Warren involved, although I think Perry Warren's got other things on his plate right now.
Give it a few weeks.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah. I've got to believe that the smart meter system must be giving them a whole bunch of information. They don't seem to be able to handle the connection between the smart meter feedback and the messages they send out when there is an outage. We have offered in the past to Ted Duran to sit with their people and suggest ways and means of improving the text messages that they send out. I was getting a message saying that PICO's records indicate that our power is on when it was actually off. And the restoration time was about 3 or 4 hours ahead. Now, if my power is on, why do I need to worry about restoration? Actually, the power, obviously there was a disconnect between the message and the.
Anecdotally, that's a pretty common thing from what I hear.
Like that, and that really upsets people in an outage if the information from PICO is bad.
Yeah. Agreed. So, sorry, I've been doing a lot of program management lately, so I'm always getting to the action items list these days.
Yeah.
I have them on the brain. So so a couple things. As I think you've learned from setting up this meeting, life during COVID requires a little more coordination in terms of getting a meeting date and time. They're different than they were in the past in that we have an outside company. I believe it's Atlantic Events, the folks that let us into the room ahead of time, where you saw their names and videos. So the way we've done is we've consolidated all the meetings into 2 or 3 week span every month. So the idea is you send an email to township manager requesting a meeting time, or a Zoom slot, as it were, with sometime in that span, and he'll respond, or he'll have someone respond with a couple of dates and times that make sense for everyone, and you can say yay or nay. So the first thing I would recommend is moving up to meeting monthly for a while anyway, as we get through developing this plan, in preparation for whatever we end up doing. That'd be number one. So just please, the group can obviously decide that, but that would be my one recommendation, and to coordinate with township manager as soon as possible on the next meeting date for next month. And then I think coming up with a few action items, I think Jason was given a few to-do items here for on one end of it. And on the other end, we have our plan for communicating, and then for obtaining data and how to deal with complaints, etc. I think separate but related to that is coming up with concepts for having a meeting or presentation that includes PICO, and it's either traditional PICO presentation of the township, or some meeting with PICO and the surround other community leaders, let's say, at the state and local level. That is more, I'll call it a management meeting more so than a public meeting.
No, not a public meeting.
Well, public meeting's still an option. I know they don't want one, but it's still an option at some point. But I think early at this phase of the game, I think I'll call it a management meeting, for lack of a better term. Maybe organizing our thoughts around that and coming back and discussing both of those items at the next meeting, see where we're at.
Yeah, as under item 4E, 1, 2, and 3, it'd be nice to get in that presentation from PICO. What is the status of the vegetation management program in Lower Makefield? Do we have to wait another 5 years, or are they doing something in the next few months? So that'd be nice to know. What have they done since 2015? You were talking about improvements around your way, Dan. And what is their comment about overhead versus underground distribution? I know that there have been a number of underground cable failures, which must be very expensive to fix. Around our way, they're digging up and redigging up and trying to patch cables underground.
So maybe one of the things we could do, thinking out loud, is come up with, and I know you've already done this, so you're probably going to want to reach to the screen and hit me, but turning...
It was a red button, yeah.
Exactly. It would be well deserved. Just as we look, it's a newish board, and it's a new time, new manager, generally speaking, over these last couple of years. So it's probably going to be some repeat of things past and just updating. But as we look to come up with that management meeting, ahead of that meeting, there's usually some sort of letter that introduces it and says, "Hey, could you be ready to talk about this stuff, or could you provide this information ahead of time, and let's meet to discuss it."
Yep.
And that's essentially what you're covering on the agenda.
Yes, yeah, and we did have a meeting. Can you remember it, Bernie? Maybe 2016, that time period, with PICO in the township building. and there must have been maybe 20 of us in the audience, and it was very good, very useful.
Yeah. Let's do something similar. I think it's good. It's good to just have those meetings periodically, even every 4 years. Time it with the elections and the Olympics or something. But it's good to have. It's good to have them again to get an update of where we're at, see where the successes and failures have been, and where we can improve and help each other out and keep moving on.
So, John, do you think we need to put our heads together or independently and have request a meeting from? Is it reasonable to have one before the election or after the election?
Well, any meeting. Sorry, I'll chime in, John. Sorry.
Yep.
I think any meeting with PICO and or elected officials, you'd want to wait till afterwards because they're just going straight.
I was talking specifically, as you requested, that we need to kind of get our heads together. And
I'm sorry. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, November 3rd is a Tuesday, right? So it would be, there are only limited slots. I don't think you could get another one in October on Zoom through the way we have it set up. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. So it would ultimately be sometime after the election, depending on.
Okay, that's fine.
Good question, though. Yeah.
So, well, what we have to do is to put our thinking caps on and prepare ourselves for a meeting sometime in November. And meanwhile, me and John will walk through the woods of Lower Makefield and discuss things.
I'll be happy to do that, Bertie.
Take a walk wear your orange. It will be hunting season soon. So.
No.
I didn't sign up to walk through the woods, just for the record. No.
You
Good
say
for
you
you.
did or you didn't? I missed that.
I did not. I did not.
Okay. Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm being funny.
These Syracuse guys they're only driven.
I only go in the woods when it's cold and snowy, so I have to wait for that.
No, we wimp out. We Brits wimp out. We can do rain, but we don't do too much with snow.
No.
Yeah, you guys know rain. I know that.
Yes. Yeah. Well, anyway, meanwhile, back at this meeting, I think we've beaten things to death here. We know what has to be done. We've got to get PICO's attention, and it would very much help if we could get the township on our side. So we'll take your advice, Dan, and do whatever we can to make things happen. And we would look to you to make sure it does, whatever we send in doesn't go into that dead letter file. So
it will not. It will not.
And Dan, you recommend that we request a meeting after the election.
I think there's I don't think there would be anything available before then.
Okay.
Just based on what it said, you can request it for as soon as you want. It doesn't. I wouldn't tell you anything otherwise because it's for your group to do the work that you want to do. So you can meet as often as you want, assuming there's as long as there's space to do so, and we can advertise it and follow all the rules. But my guess, from a practical standpoint, I don't think it's going to happen till first, second week in November, based on our typical schedules and what's available.
one of the things I would refer to the PUC reliability report. I just put this chart up on the screen, the one I called the Who's a Naughty Boy chart. PICO never had red on this chart until the last few years. So PICO was always in the lead. be nice to know what Pico's doing to get off of that chart. Bear in mind, of course, that the information that's released in 2020 is based on 2019. So, anyway. So, is there anything else for the good of the company? It's good to see you again, Lee. For Jason's benefit, and it's before your time, Dan, Lee did arrange a visit to PJM, the PJM Interconnect facility, and we're not at liberty to say where it is because it is a national secret. It was very, very impressive how they monitor the flow of energy into and out of their district, and their district is quite large. It covers 13 states and DC and so on and so on. The thing that impressed me most was that they have two sites and they're both identical, and if one gets knocked out, then the other one just picks up seamlessly and carries on. But anyway.
Well, I could set that up again after this virus thing goes away.
Well, it's of interest, Lee, but it doesn't really do much for Lower Makefield, does it? So that's
no.
Remember that. Anything else?
Now vote to adjourn the meeting.
All those in favour of adjournment, raise your hands. Meeting adjourned.
I don't get a vote. That's
Thanks,
why I
guys.
didn't raise mine.
Here, everybody.
Welcome to the team, Jason.
Okay.
Thanks, Dan.
Care.
Thanks, guys, and thanks for joining in, Jason.